Good.
Okay, so I guess the last little bit of I guess yesterday's teaching got trimmed a little bit. So I guess I'm going to be going back over kind of the end of yesterday's teaching. So this will be the first time for Helen to see this. One of the things that we were talking about towards the end of yesterday was about, we were getting into Obadiah and also beginning to touch on, Jubilees. And a slightly different take, on some of the things like we see there in the book of Genesis. So let me get the presentation going here. All right, everybody speed reading?
Real fast.
Got it.
All right, you got it? Okay, can you repeat all that, Helen? That's right.
You gotta move it a little bit to the right, though.
Oh, okay, yes. Let's see.
All right, you're
Is
right.
that,
There you
get everything,
go.
just a little more?
Maybe.
That's good, though.
Okay, good. All right. Okay, this is about connecting the dots. Or book 1, book 2, book 3 you've never read before. I think was that the what you used, Rad, as the names for them? Yeah. So all right. Well, let's just dive in, and what we're looking at right here is Esau or Edom, Edomites, and how the preface for me of this is the enemy that's the most dangerous is the enemy you don't know about. In Edom, Esau does a pretty good job at hiding behind the scenes, where you don't even realize that you got an enemy, eventually in your midst. And that, what we're talking about here is looking at people's characteristics, or a group's characteristics, or a nation's characteristics. What are they known by? And Obadiah, hits on that pretty well. And we're going to skip the first 9 verses of Obadiah. It talks about Esau, Edom, being humbled. We're going to start in here with some of the violence that Edom has done to Judah, more specifically. For thy violence against thy brother Jacob, shame shall cover thee, and thou shalt be cut off forever. And how long is that?
Forever.
So interesting. And Jubilees collaborates that. In the day that thou stoodest on the other side, in the day that the stranger carried away captive his forces, and foreigners entered into his gates and cast lots upon Jerusalem, even thou wast as one of them. But thou shouldest not have looked on the day of thy brother in the day that he became a stranger. Neither shouldest thou have rejoiced over the children of Judah in the day of their destruction. Neither shouldest thou have spoken proudly in the day of distress. Thou shouldest not have entered into the gate of my people in the day of their calamity. Yea, thou shouldest not have looked on their affliction in the day of their calamity, nor have laid hands on their substance in the day of their calamity. Neither shouldest thou have stood in the crossway to cut off those of his that did escape. Neither shouldest thou have delivered up those of his that did not remain in the day of distress. And verses 15 through 18, for the day of the Lord is near upon all the heathen. As thou hast done, it shall be done unto thee. And that's interesting. We're going to be looking later at the second part of the 2 greatest commandments, and where he talks about, as you want really done unto you, is what you should do unto them. And also, pray for your enemies. and love your enemies. If you love your enemies, you don't have an enemy. So we'll hit that later today. So again, for the day of the Lord is near upon the heathen. As thou hast done, it shall be done unto thee. Thy reward shall return upon thine own head. For as ye have drunk upon my holy mountain, so shall all the heathen drink continually. Yea, they shall drink, and they shall swallow down, and they shall be as though they had not been. But upon Mount Zion shall be deliverance, and there shall be holiness, and the house of Jacob shall possess their possessions. And the house of Jacob shall be a fire, and the house of Joseph a flame, and the house of Esau for stubble. And they shall kindle in them, and devour them, and there shall not be any remaining of the house of Esau, for the Lord hath spoken it. And they of the south shall possess the mount of Esau, and they of the plain of the Philistines, and they shall possess the fields of Ephraim, and the fields of Samaria, and Benjamin shall possess Gilead. And the captivity of this host of the children of Israel shall possess that of the Canaanites, even unto Zarephath. And the captivity of Jerusalem, which is in Shepharad, shall possess the cities of the south. And Savior shall come up on Mount Zion to judge the mount of Esau, and the kingdom shall be the Lord's. So it's quite a pronunciation against Edom. And with the latter prophets, you see a number of different groups that are the enemies, by their actions of the people of Jacob. And you have a number, and so Edom is part of this pronunciation against those who turned into, that should have been brothers, that actually turned into being enemies instead. Now, the Genesis, you should be familiar with the Genesis 27 about the quote-unquote blessing that Isaac had of Esau. So we're not going to go back through that, but we're going to look at Jubilees. Jubilees adds something, again, that's going to be the same as what we're seeing in Obadiah, but adds a slightly different twist to things. So Jubilees 26, verse 32 through the beginning of chapter 27, it says, And Esau said to Isaac, his father, Hast thou but one blessing, O father? Bless me, even me also, father. And Esau lifted up his voice and wept. And Isaac answered and said unto him, Behold, far from the dew of earth shall be thy dwelling, and far from the dew of heaven from above. And I've always wondered about that. What's this dew and from heaven and earth, and that they're far from? Something for further study.
Could it be raining?
Could be rain, and that rain could be both physical and spiritual, potentially. And by the sword wilt thou live, and thou wilt serve thy brother. And it shall come to pass, when thou becomest great, and dost shake his yoke from off thy neck, thou shalt sin a complete sin unto death, and thy seed shall be rooted out from under heaven. And Esau kept threatening Jacob because of the blessing wherewith his father blessed him. And he said in his heart, May the days of mourning for my father now come, so that I may say, my brother Jacob, so that I may slay my brother Jacob. And the words of Esau, her elder son, were told to Rebekah, how? In a dream. So it doesn't say that in Genesis, how she came to know this. But it came to her in a dream. And Rebekah sent and called Jacob by her younger son, and said unto him, Behold, Esau, thy brother will take vengeance on thee, so as to kill thee. Now therefore, my son, obey my voice, and arise and flee thou to Laban, my brother, to Haran, and tarry with him a few days, until thy brother's anger turns away, and he remove his anger from thee. And forget all that thou hast done. Then I will send and fetch thee from thence. So to go back, that tidbit that's a little extra, that's not mentioned in Genesis, that thou, will sin a sin that results in what?
I died.
Yep. Their complete elimination. So as we're looking at Obadiah chapter 1, and then this, additional, the Genesis and Jubilees passage. Again, I repeat, an enemy is most dangerous when the enemy is not known. And if we look at Esau and the Edomites, here's some notes and just studying their characteristics. So Ishmael is one easy to find, but Esau is much harder to find because he is hidden. And that's one of his characteristics, is to remain hidden, kind of behind the scenes. There will be maybe front individuals, but the operation happens in what's mostly not known by most people. So there's a characteristic. And Genesis 36:8 says Esau dwelt in Mount Seir. So after leaving Isaac, he went down into this territory. And it's interesting to watch the progression that he moves through, and his descendants move through. It says in Deuteronomy 2:22 that they move into another group's territory, and then they take it over from within. And Genesis 36:15 says they changed, instead of calling Esau descendants sons, they were now calling them dukes. So they've moved up in elevation. They've moved up in the government system of that particular, group. You can almost call them basically that particular nation. And Genesis 36:31 says, no longer called Mount Seir or land of the Horites, but became the land of Edom. They took it over. And what they ended up doing, as I understand it, they ended up enslaving those original inhabitants. So this is a characteristic that they follow. They come in, they'll take over, the government system. They'll come in and take over the financial system. They come in and take over the educational system. The entertainment, the media, the libraries, the publications, all of the information, and in an attempt to take over the thinking of the people. And it may be to change the people where they even welcome the enslavement. You'll be happy, nothing. Yeah. So keep, again, keep an eye watching the characteristics. Sometimes the characteristics can identify the people. Now, this was something that I wanted to hit on real quickly. I had mentioned this before, and then it kind of found in my notes. So this is kind of a little side note. I've been known to take tangents, haven't I, Helen? According to historical documents, the transmission of the first bishop of the church in Antioch, which was, its tradition says it was Peter. Well, that went from Peter to Linus. I guess the bishop of Rome, followed by Linus. Then Anacletus, then Clement, then Ariaristus, then Alexander, then Sixtus. For Antioch, okay, this is where I wanted to get. That was for Rome. For Antioch, Peter was the bishop of Antioch, followed by Evoditus, followed by Ignatius. And maybe some of y'all have heard Ignatius, some of the early church father writings. There are a number of different writings that Ignatius came in. But I wanted to zero in on before Ignatius. And let me make sure, okay, followed by Hero. Hero is the contemporary of Sixtus. This was the early 2nd century when Sextus would have been bishop. But if I go back to the second bishop of Antioch here, and Evodius, he was as I understand it, the first bishop of a church that was not a Hebrew. But he also was the first bishop of a church that declared their church was autonomous to the council in Jerusalem, and that every church was their own authority. So, and I've always, my upbringing is always looked at Antioch as being the fundamental pillar of the Newer Testament and all the different Greek writings and such. And so, again, another tidbit of information, something else to look at and balance. But after, as I understand it, even before the destruction of Jerusalem and the dispersion of that council in Jerusalem, Antioch was already beginning to write a lot of Greek copies of text. And we know that there are so many different copies written in Greek. And as I understand it, came out of Antioch. But there's a possibility that was somewhat in competition to another authority. And sometimes when you have someone else in competition, you end up publishing as much as you possibly can.
There were different Antiochs. Which one did this one do?
Turkey.
Huh?
The one in Turkey. Yeah, correct.
Okay.
Yep. So as I said, another little tidbit, something else to look into as you begin to learn more things. So, all right, that was my tangent side trail. Getting back, this next portion, we're going to be looking at primarily Psalms 83 and these enemies that surround Jerusalem. But the War Scroll is one of the scrolls found in the Dead Sea Scrolls. So there was, as I understand, a few copies of this found. But one of the things that it says in it says, "For the master, the rule of war on the unleashing of the attack of the sons of light against the company of the sons of darkness, the army of Belial against," and what's interesting, the reason I'm bringing this up is all of these different groups that surrounded Jerusalem. So, Israel had their enemies basically completely surrounding them for much of their time. An exception right there, Philistia, right above that, and where Tyre was, which is modern day Lebanon. There was a strip through there that they had sea access through that was not completely surrounding them, but they were pretty closely surrounded. So it says here, "And the sons of light against the company of the sons of darkness, the army of Belial, against the band of Edom, Moab, and the sons of Ammon, and against the army of the sons of the east, and the Philistines, and against the bands of the Kittim of Assyria, and their allies, the ungodly of the covenant. And the kingdom of Assyria, I think, is all these different nations that the Assyrians brought in to Samaria. And, those were not, Israelites. Now, some of them did convert to following the law. What I don't know is that the definition, was that law, or was that Talmud, or both, or a combination of each. But they were able to be called Jews if they were circumcised and kept the law. And again, I don't know which law definition that was. So Psalms 83 also kind of goes along the same line, talking about these enemies that surround Israel. It says, a song of Psalms of Asaph. Keep not thou silence, O God. Hold not thy peace. Be not still, O God. For lo, thine enemies make a tumult, and they that hate thee have lifted up the head. They have taken crafty counsel against thy people, and consulted against thy hidden ones. They have said, come, let us cut them off from being a nation, that the name of Israel, and again, this is not the name of Judah, but the name of Israel may be no more in remembrance. And it always seems to be that the Lord's people have always been attacked. This has been true even from the Garden of Eden. Anybody that is identified as the Lord's people, the enemy wants to annihilate them. And I don't know if this is out of jealousy or what. But again, a characteristic of the enemy. They always seem to be wanting to annihilate Israel and who those people are, including the lost tribes. Verse 5, for they have consulted together with one consent. So all these different enemies, different nations, they've been acting almost as if one, united together as an enemy. Hey, Murphy. So again, for they have consulted together with one consent. They are confederate against thee. The tabernacles of Edom and the Ishmaelites and, of Moab and the Hagarenes. Again, these are, when you go back to Abraham, they're all related. This is a family feud. If you want to count it as Abraham. But they are wanting to annihilate. Gebel and Ammon and Amalek and the Philistines with the inhabitants of Tyre. Asher also is joined with them. They have a hope in the children of Lot, Selah. Do unto them as unto the Midianites, as to Sisera, as to Jabin, at the brook of Kison, which perished at Endor. They became as dung for the earth. Make their nobles like Oreb and like Zeb, yea, all their princes as Zebah and as Zalmunna, who said, let us take to ourselves the houses of God in possession. A key there. They're always wanting to take for themselves the possessions of the house of God. Their eyes are focused on his house to take possession of it. And through the centuries, they've been striving for that. O my God, make them like a wheel, as the stubble before the wind. As the fire burneth a wood, and as the flame setteth the mountains on fire, so persecute them with thy tempest, and make them afraid with thy storm. Fill their faces with shame, that they may seek thy name, O Lord. Interesting. Again, this is not total destruction. And we see that even in the millennial reign, that some of the, 1/6 of those who came up to fight against, Israel, are allowed to actually, go, they survive, and they go into the millennial reign. So again, and somewhat get them to turn around so they will bless you. Not a total destruction. Let them be confounded and troubled forever. Yea, let them be put to shame and perish, that men may know that thou, whose name alone is Jehovah, art the most high over all the earth. So as we look at these different nations here that are mentioned, that really do surround Israel. What's interesting is some of these are part of the family of Abraham and descendants of Abraham. Some are not. And the ones who are not, you've got Nephilim associated with those groups. And even if you look at Esau through marriage with the Canaanite wives, again, you have Nephilim involvement here. So, and the Israelites were told to annihilate the Nephilim line. Now, one of the characteristics of the Nephilim line is their narcissistic attitude of wanting to control everyone else. That's a characteristic of them. They want to rule everyone else. They want to enslave. And if they can't enslave, they want to destroy you. Now, during the Hasmonean dynasty, and I bring this picture up here, under the Hasmonean dynasty, and we're going to see the leadership of that was an intermixing of Samaritan and Edomites and such were mixed in together with the leadership. Even King Herod, a part of the Hasmonean dynasty, was an Edomite. And during the Hasmonean dynasty, we see here on the left the lands that the Hasmonean dynasty conquered. And the origins of the Hasmonean dynasty appear, as far as I can tell, to be more out of Sumerian and those nations that were brought in, is what I'm beginning to uncover. And I haven't fully got to the end of that, but there appears to be much more of a connection and not pure Israelite. So if that be the case, they were actually able to then confederate with other nations surrounding them, and actually, through their dynasty, add to their size. So you see all these different nations that were mentioned here in Psalms 83. The Hasmonean dynasty ended up absorbing most of those areas and most of those different kingdoms. And a confederacy appeared to have been made during that period of time. And the Messiah was born into that environment. And that basically war that was going on behind the scenes, and the persecution. And it's interesting, again, we started off with the on Friday night talking about the Messiah calling these different ones, vipers and serpents. And there may be more to that, and there might be more why he was using that terminology specifically. One of the things too that was going on during, if you're familiar with Antiochus Epiphanes, when Greek was ruling the land there of Jerusalem, and even ruling this over the head of the Hasmonean dynasty that was concurrently ruling together with the Greeks. There was a civil war that had broke out within this land that was going on, and Antiochus Epiphanes was actually down in Egypt when this broke out. And it says in Maccabees that he actually, Antiochus Epiphanes, returned back to Jerusalem to try to deal with this. But it started off as a civil war. And there were actually Samaritans that were killing some of the Judeans in that civil war that was going on. So this again, the war scroll that was mentioned. I don't know if this war scroll, sometimes when there is prophecy, and this war scroll talks about those who are sons of light against the sons of darkness, and this battle that's going on. And sometimes prophecy happens multiple times. It cycles through. So there's a real strong possibility that this is both talking about the end time, but also the time here during the revolt, the civil war that was going on. So there's a possibility it applied to both, and maybe even a third or fourth other time. It's interesting that the war scrolls also calls out the same nations that Psalms 83 is referring to, and these nations that were confederated under the Hasmonean dynasty. So you had again the sons of light identify the war scrolls as Levi, Benjamin, Judah, the exiles in the desert. So Judea, and the Edom, Moab, Ammon, Amalekites, Philistia, and their allies. The nations that had been, the Assyrians had brought in. Also here is just looking at the Maccabees, and this Hasmonean dynasty, who was both in control of the government, who was also in control of the priesthood, because they took over the priesthood, and they didn't allow the Zadokite priesthood to come back in. Also, they changed it to where there was a high priest office rather than a rotation of 24 that was normally happening. So this is where you start to see the high priest coming in. Also, it's interesting too that as I understand it, and we were talking about this morning, that the Sadducees and the Pharisees, as an organized group, did not get started until you had the Hasmonean dynasty. So there was, we were talking about the remnants of the Pharisees that sort of informally existed after Babylon, but they didn't operate as a formal group until the Hasmonean dynasty. And the Pharisees were very involved with the proselytizing, and, many different others. And, again, getting them to be, the males to be circumcised and to follow the law, whether that's Talmud or Torah or a combination of both. So a lot of change is happening here, and you really have a religious system that is a new system than what existed. What existed before the Greeks came in, and the Persians even before them, and in these other nations, ruling that. So, you had Ezra and Nehemiah, when they came back from Babylon, and they really, Ezra was pulling his hair out, realizing what even this 5% of the Judeans had returned, but even those were hugely corrupted. They had intermarried, with those that they were supposed to have destroyed. Now they're married to them, and so Ezra and Nehemiah, did a great effort in trying to change that. But just like they had a huge problem getting Egypt out of the Israelites when they came, with Moses. They very much struggled getting Babylon out of their hearts for the remnant that returned back. And in effect, Yahuwah didn't come in like he had done in Exodus and just destroyed. There was much more, a fearful consequence that was happening that conformed them, and really by the second generation they got Egypt pretty much out, of their hearts for the most part. But that didn't happen, when in coming back from Babylon. And it appears that Babylon ended up really winning. Babylon in their hearts ended up winning, and carried much of their future forward. And that's what the Messiah is born into. And you had the followers of the way, because the way had been so corrupted, it almost didn't hardly even exist, other than possibly in Qumran. But the Messiah came in, and how the Lord often does, he comes in when everything looks like it's hopeless, and just like at the end of Revelation, you see what the end ends up, what happens. So the Lord's still got all this under control, even though the enemy seems like the enemy has all the strings. But they don't necessarily breathe fire out of the mouth and able to destroy everybody. That is the enemy. They don't have they think they've got control. They're just actors, acting out a play. Now, I found some things that, Rad, this kind of goes with our discussion that we were having yesterday. And I found some of these things yesterday and today that I thought I'd bring into this discussion. So we're talking about one of the things, the name America and its tie with a flying feathered serpent is the original use of the word, especially by the Incas and such. But we had a very moral founding to our nation. A lot of moral seed was planted here. And here's a conversation of letters going back and forth between John Adams and Thomas Jefferson that we found was very interesting. And really this is talking about the Jesuits. And I really don't see the Jesuits as being that different from, say, the Pharisees, the rabbinical system. I think they're all working in the same confederacy, and call it that. So John Adams says, I do not like the late resurrection of the Jesuits. They have a general now in Russia, in correspondence with the Jesuits in the U.S., who are more numerous than everybody knows. So again, they're operating in secret. Shall we not have swarms of them here? If ever any congregation of men could merit eternal perdition on earth and in hell, it is this company of Loialea. There's some that's pretty strong words, even for for their time, and they were known for putting together some incredible sentences in the way they would write. So our system, however, of religious liberty must afford them an asylum. But if they do not not put the purity of our elections to a severe trial, it will be a wonder. So this is what John wrote, and this is Thomas Jefferson's, writing back to John, and in that he says, "I dislike with you the Restoration because it marks a retrograde step from light toward darkness." So just like the sons of light and the sons of darkness here. So they identify the Jesuits as basically sons of darkness.
Here it says 40 years after the founding of the country.
Yeah. Yep. And here is a response back from John Adams. It says, "This society has been a greater calamity to mankind than the French Revolution or Napoleon's despotism or ideology. It has obstructed the progress of Reformation." Again, what Reformation would that be? That they obstructed?
Martin Luther's.
I think so. That would be my guess.
And what is despotism?
Despotism.
Despotism.
What is that?
Like, it's. Brad, you have a better definition. It's pretty low.
I would go with a single person that has seized control through military force.
Okay.
Yeah, for not good results. Yeah. So it has obstructed the progress of Reformation and the improvement of the human mind in society much longer and more fatally. So these are men who are really interested in improving society, progressing, the philosophical thinking of people, and they identify the Jesuits as the enemies to that, and they really identify them as, they could potentially be fatal to what we're trying to create here.
What's interesting to me is they're having these conversations in the midst of doing ongoing sea battle with Israel.
Mm-hmm.
And consider, based on this conversation, it's almost secondary. It's like, we don't even need to talk about that because we know what that is and it just is. But they think that this is more important to focus on.
Even what was the first war after the Revolutionary War here in the United States? Anybody know that?
First war after Revolution?
There was one before 1812.
French Indian?
What's that?
French Indian?
It was the Barbarian Coast.
Barbary
of
Coast.
Africa.
Barbary Coast.
Barbary Coast, thank you.
Didn't involve the French.
Yeah, well, pretty close.
Which kind of just went on. It was kind of like our whole thing in the Middle East has been for the last 40 years. It just went on, and the Barbary Coast was, I mean, they were still actively involved in that in the early 1900s.
And what was going on is they were actually capturing our ships and enslaving the people.
It was pirates, right? Piracy.
The piracy, correct. And they were, there was a, many folks look at, well, there's only a black slave trade. Well, no, there was a white slave trade going into those northern Africa also. So it was a two-way. Many folks don't know that.
And what other, just to tie that together, that whole Barbary Coast conflict, the pirates were effectively Islam, Muslims.
But who captained the ships? You know who the captains of those ships tended to be? What group? Jews.
Who?
Jews.
It was you?
Jews were normally the captains of slave ships.
Oh, question,
Well,
in that
People that call
Themselves.
themselves
Again,
Jews.
and we have to, that's the reason in this, we've been going back, there are many people who call themselves Jews that are not Jews. There is a host of people who call themselves Jews that are not Jews.
Oh.
So they're not Judean in neither genetically nor religiously. They're not Judean.
Wow.
They're different on both of those aspects.
Would Christopher Columbus be one of those?
He
Because
was also a Jew.
he was a Jew.
He was a Jew, correct. Now,
Might clarify for him, because Josh asked if he was one of them.
Yeah.
yes, he was one of those who called themselves Jews that are not Jews,
Ah.
correct.
So.
Yeah, follow the characteristics of those early, say Spanish, mostly Spanish, but also Dutch as explorers, which again, captained, by those who called themselves Jews that are not Jews. What they tended to do, whether it was Philippines, whether it was Central America, South America, and even some of North America, they would come in and pillage the people and enslave them and turn them into slaves. That was a characteristic that they tended to follow. The British, not nearly as much so, but there were still some, even with some of the British involvement.
For the most part, Josh, from that time period up and through today, those that are trying to create a distinction between Israelite Jews, Judea, versus this other group of fake Jews, will generally refer to the fake Jews as Khazar.
Mm-hmm. Yep, or Khazarian, correct.
Ah.
Same, correct. So.
Which you touched on yesterday.
Correct. And again, the Khazars were famous for, on the Silk Road trade, killing the merchants and taking over their identity. Taking over someone's identity is something that they're used to doing. So for them to then call themselves Jews that were not Jews, they're used to doing that.
I'm being skated back to my high school days. I was taught wrong, totally wrong.
We all were. We all
Yeah.
We have more ways than you know.
were. Yeah, and we're still discovering those things.
Yep.
For the most part, the Khazars control Israel at this point.
Correct. Most of the majority of those in modern day Israel came from this, Western Russian area, which was predominant. I mean, that's where the Khazarians, that and Ukraine and bleeding into Poland. This is all a previous Khazarian empire, located on the Silk Road Trail. Is where they were at. Interesting history. Now you hear the rest of the story.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, that's right. So anyways, I wanted to touch a little bit, Jubilees a little bit more, and get in whether it's called the Didache, Didache, or Didac. I've heard it called all three. One of the things I want to touch on here is Jubilees 46, and read that. It says, "And it came to pass that after Jacob died, the children of Israel multiplied in the land of Egypt." And what I find really interesting is under Joseph, when you have a truly righteous individual, and we see the results of that. Jubilees 46 here talks about the effects of Joseph, and even before that, Jacob. And it came to pass that after Jacob died, the children of Israel multiplied in the land of Egypt, and they became a great nation, and they were of one accord in heart, so that brother loved brother, and every man helped his brother. And they increased abundantly and multiplied exceedingly. 10 weeks of years, all the days of the life of Joseph. And get this, there was no Satan nor any evil all the days of the life of Joseph. There was no Satan operating in the midst where they were at.
Wow.
Yeah.
Just that nation, right?
Just where his, I would say where he ruled. The land in the area where he ruled. There was no Satan.
Wow.
Yeah, so that's the power of a righteous individual can have. Again, the Lord is looking throughout all the earth for anyone that their heart is perfect towards Him. And look at the results of what can happen. I mean, it just completely obliterates Satan's kingdom. Reading on, and let me find out where. Okay, here, verse 2. "And there was no Satan nor any evil all the days of the life of Joseph, which he lived after his father Jacob. For all the Egyptians honored the children of Israel all the days of the life of Joseph. And Joseph died being 110 years old. 17 years he lived in the land of Canaan. In 10 years he was a servant, and 3 years in prison. And 80 years he was under the king, ruling all the land of Egypt." So he spent most of it, that's 80 years. Most of his life was spent in ruling. But we see most of everything we read about him was before he started ruling. "And he died, and all his brethren, and all that generation." And this is the point, how important it is to install for the future generation. So you had the effect of that generation. Now we move on. "And he commanded the children of Israel before he died that they should carry his bones with them when they went forth from the land of Egypt. And he made them swear regarding his bones, for he knew that the Egyptians would not again bring forth and bury him in the land of Canaan. For Macamaran, king of Canaan, while dwelling in the land of Assyria, fought in the valley of the king of Egypt and slew him there. So he slew Pharaoh and pursued after the Egyptians to the gates of Irma. So they were afraid to go any more into that land of Canaan after this event. So they wouldn't take the bones of Joseph up after this. But he was not able to enter, for a new king had become king of Egypt, and he was stronger than he, and he returned to the land of Canaan. And the gates of Egypt were closed, and none went out, and none came into Egypt. And Joseph died in the 46th Jubilee, in the 6th week, in the 2nd year, and they buried him in the land of Egypt. And all his brethren died after him. And the king of Egypt went forth to war with the king of Canaan in the 47th Jubilee, in the 2nd week, in the 2nd year. And the children of Israel brought forth all the bones of the children of Jacob, save the bones of Joseph. And they buried them in the field, in the double cave in the mountain. And the most of them returned to Egypt. It says most. But a few of them remained in the mountains of Hebron and Amram. Thy father remained with them. And the king of Canaan was victorious over the king of Egypt, and he closed the gates of Egypt. And he devised an evil device against the children of Israel. So as I understand it, he had taken over Egypt at this point. A new pharaoh that was not an Egyptian. We were talking earlier, and looking at some of the Dead Sea Scrolls material, this pharaoh that appointed Joseph as ruling over Egypt appears to be Akhenaten, and he had a priest, and the Dead Sea Scrolls refer to Akhenaten and his priest as being Shemites. So literally Joseph taking this priest's daughter as a wife was something that they were allowed to do. They were allowed to marry Shemites because Israel was originally from the son of Shem, one of Noah's descendants. But this new pharaoh that took over was not a Shemite. And he devised an evil device against the children of Israel, of afflicting them. And he said unto the people of Egypt, Behold, the people of the children of Israel have increased and multiplied more than we. Come, let us deal wisely with them before they become too many. And let us afflict them with slavery before war come upon us, and before they too fight against us. Else they will join themselves unto our enemies and get them up out of our land. For their hearts and faces are towards the land of Canaan. So they already knew that their hearts and what they were facing, what their faces were always towards the promised land, what they've been promised. And he set over them taskmasters to afflict them with slavery. And they built strong cities for Pharaoh, Pithom and Ramses, and they built all the walls and all the foundations which had fallen in the cities of Egypt. And they made them serve with rigor, and the more they dealt evilly with them, the more they increased and multiplied. And the people of Egypt abominated the children of Israel.